This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz, and I'm very excited to be speaking with Greg Kwedar about Sing Sing. How are you, Greg?
Good. It's great to be with you today.
I'm very happy. I have had the chance to meet a number of directors in my time in this industry at award shows or screenings or wherever else, but I'm not sure there's someone I've run into quite as frequently after we met following the Sing Sing screening at South by Southwest and then saw each other at like seven other films. So we didn't talk as much about your film, more about other films. So I'm happy that we get to dig into that now.
Me too.
So, can you tell me how this all started and when this idea for this film first began, originating?
Yeah, and sorry for the noise. I'm in New York City, so we'll have a number of sirens play throughout our conversation. But I've been um I've been working on this for gosh, 8.5 years now, and I came across this project quite unexpectedly. I was producing a short documentary inside of a maximum security prison in Kansas, and it was my first time ever behind the walls of a prison. And on a tour of the facility, we were doing a film about something else, but I passed by a cell, and inside the cell, there was a young man raising a rescue dog inside of his cell. And it just stopped me in my tracks because it upended all my expectations about prison and incarcerated people that were largely built on the movies I grew up watching, our own industry. And yet inside this cell, I was seeing something entirely different. I was seeing healing that was happening in both directions between this man and this animal. And I was just desperate to know, was there anyone else out there doing things differently? So that night in the hotel room, I typed that question into Google, who is doing things differently in prison? And near the top of the search field was this program in New York, Rehabilitation Through the Arts, that was founded at Sing Sing in 1996 by a woman named Catherine Valkins and several of the men who were incarcerated there, including a few of our now cast members. And they started putting shows on, and they had done a lot of the classic plays over the years. And, the word was getting out and they were covered in a lot of the major press. But that night I read an Esquire magazine article about an original production of a time traveling musical comedy called Breaking the Mummy's Code. And I was just like, what is that? I was so struck by the playfulness of the work juxtaposed against the environment it was set within, the joy in the process that was so apparent, and it felt like an invitation that I just wanted to feel that joy in my own life. And so I reached out to the real life Brent Buell, and who wrote that play, Breaking the Mummy's Code, and was a 10-year volunteer there. And we had this long conversation, and at the end of it, he was just like, if you really want to understand this story, you need to meet the men who lived it. Come to New York, come to my apartment. I'm going to invite a few of my friends over. And so my creative partner, Clint, and we flew up there. And around that breakfast table, were many of the alumni from the program, including the real Clarence Divine I. Macklin and the real Divine G, both of which are at the center of our movie now. And there was just this amazing energy in that room. There was warmth and care and humor and vulnerability, and it was this feeling that was like, if we could just translate how this room feels into a movie, we have something special. And we were like, yeah, we'll probably make like the movie like later this year. And we didn't realize how hard it would be and how long it would take to actually figure out how to translate what we felt that day. But it was well worth it in the end.
Completely agree. I want to make sure before we go forward that I'm using the correct terminology. Incarcerated individuals and formerly incarcerated individuals, is that the best way to talk
Yeah,
about people?
for sure. And within RTA, those members of the cast that are alumni, we use alumni a lot, instead of like, first time actors or, whatever, because our cast has tremendous amount of experience. It just happens to be within the the setting of our movie.
Well, I will admit that I knew nothing about the film when I saw it. It was one of, I believe, two Coleman Domingo films that premiered earlier, in 2023 at festivals, and then I finally had a chance to see it at South by. Was having Coleman attached something that was important to have I mean, I'm not sure he's still a huge name, he's a big name, or was there a consideration of the real Divine G in that role?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, this is a movie about alchemy of performance. What happens when established actors dance alongside these people with real lived experience, and what that exchange creates and how the sum of those parts brings us to something profound, hopefully. And I think, the real Divine G is a tremendous actor and a writer and all the things that he is in the movie, he is in real life. But that particular role is kind of the eyes by which we see this world, this very unfamiliar world that we're traveling an audience into, and like the burden of carrying a movie on your shoulders is like one that uh, you know, I especially with a project like this and all of its kind of disparate elements of fiction and nonfiction and stage and screen and you need that kind of that 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 force that kind of can tie it all together. And I think that an actor like Coleman Domingo is one of the greatest I think of all time. And we relied on that presence, to synthesize, almost the whole movie together. Um, and then his counterpoint of Clarence Divine Eye Macklin is acting in his first feature film, and we were equally able to harness that, you know, that kind of pure, undistilled like potential and energy, um, and uh, and I think it was fascinating to watch someone with 30 years of film and TV experience go to, have someone in their very first film going toe to toe with him. And it was electric in the room, and it really is. Every time I see the film, it's kind of like, um, looking at a shooting star or something. It just kind of takes your breath away.
And one of my favorite things about seeing films at festivals, especially those I haven't researched ahead of time, is that, people come out afterwards and the audience is just so warm and so receptive. And having just discovered, him for myself to then see that is really, I think very magical.
There's something that happens in the room with this movie, especially in environments like that, where at a certain point in the film, I think as an audience, you start to go, no one could have written that. Only someone could have lived it, you know? And then the end credits roll by, and you're like, oh, the majority of this cast are actually portraying, some version of their own story in this film. And then to have that person then walk out onto a stage afterwards, like it almost like feels like an extension of the film itself. Like during a Q&A with this particular film, you s- you feel like you're still living inside of it.
Absolutely. What was the filming experience like in terms of actually using cells and other things? And was that something that you had to set, or the cast had to set boundaries for, just because I assume it was somewhat triggering?
Oh yeah, without question. I mean, for one, the pace we made this film was kind of extraordinary. We made the movie in 19 days, and we turned four locations into our one Sing Sing. And so all the exteriors of the facility is the real place. We shot a day at the real Sing Sing. And then all of like the more traditional prison interiors was at a place called Downstate Correctional Facility, which was a maximum security prison that closed 1 month before we went inside. And what was unique about this place was that the entirety of our alumni cast had been incarcerated there at one point in their journeys. And so they were going to be, voluntarily traveling back inside of a place that once held them, against their will. And we were very sensitive to that as a community. And it was not something we took lightly and, did, you know, kind of the maybe not often done, but felt obvious to us, which was to have a therapist on set that could be accessible to the men if there was something kind of re-traumatizing or re-triggering. But it wasn't what was actually accessed more. What I think the the process for the men themselves was found sort of within their own sort of group of alumni and how they leaned on each other. And also this sort of transformation that happened where there was a lot of apprehension going in, but I think collectively the men are very proud of this program and wanted this story out in the world, and so the purpose was greater than the discomfort. And being back in this place, like when they were incarcerated at downstate, every movement you took was supervised by someone else, and what room you could walk in at what time, um and the these kind of the rigidity of that and oppressiveness of that experience. Now you were inside that same facility, but you were free to move wherever you wanted, and what that started to do, and the catharsis sort of found within that of like, oh, I could open any door I want or turn off and on the lights, and just like these simple acts of like kind of reclaiming a space for yourself. And then also the prison greens was a something I didn't perceive going in as being as difficult for the men to put those back on their bodies, because that clothing is a symbol, of reducing you from a person into a number, essentially. And Clarence would tell me that later that putting those greens on his body like would itch, you know, almost like it was rejecting, that being on his skin again. But again, the transformation that occurred was like allowing your mind to now perceive this as a costume by which to express a character. And in that, it was also its own kind of liberation.
We had a chance to show the film in operational facilities.
We actually, our New York premiere of Sing Sing was inside Sing Sing, and uh, I mean, honestly, like no words I could tell you would suffice like to the fullness of what that experience was or meant. But, there are things that what's beautiful about it is there are things that played just like they did at Toronto and at South by Southwest or in a multiplex, the same laughs, the same gasps, the same like moments where your eyes wet. But then there were also things that only happened in that room that I've never experienced in any other theater, particularly at the end of the film um when they're driving down an open road and the window's open and Coleman puts his head out and feels that air on his face, and you could feel men in that audience kind of moving their face in the air, like yearning for that sensation again, and then we as civilians walked out in that night, and knew how precious that air was when the rest of our audience was staying inside. It was a very sobering experience. And then, recently we were part of the first ever film festival inside of a prison at San Quentin in California, and that was particularly special because we were screening our work alongside other incarcerated filmmakers, and so we were watching their stories unfold on screen and then got to share our work, and we were all sitting shoulder to shoulder inside of a dark theater just like we were anywhere in the world, and that was really special. I mean, one of our peers who had their short film screened that day couldn't attend his Q&A because he was facing the parole board during his screening, you know. And then he ended up winning the jury prize for best doc short and got to come on stage and announce that he was going home and he had made parole. It was like one of the most special standing ovations I've ever been in the room for, what was showered upon that man. And I think going forward, several of our alumni casts have kind of organized a coalition that's going to drive the impact campaign for this film, where they want to bring the film to prisons all over the country and be there for these conversations in the room, and hopefully what that can inspire, and how it can expand the imagination of the incarcerated people they share it with, feels really special and necessary.
Is this a world that you want to continue exploring in the future, whether in documentary or feature or narrative features?
It's interesting. There's the question of like as an artist and as a citizen of the world, and I would say as an artist, my partner Clint and I, we love the experience of discovery, of stepping into a new world and becoming a student of it, and exploring these different communities and finding ways to help render what's happening there onto the screen. And so as an artist, I just feel pulled into new horizons. But as a person, as a citizen, this you can't go through an experience like this and not be kind of forever altered and changed and become you don't get as close a look at what's happening within the story and not want to become a champion of programs like this and become an activist in your own way. And so as a person, yes, I want to stay engaged with what Rehabilitation Through the Arts is doing. I mean, I was a volunteer teacher in the program as part of our research process, and I want to continue to use my capacity as an artist to um, help send the elevator back down and help others like sort of find their way into this path. One of the things that happened at San Quentin, just as an example, is one of the filmmakers there was really curious about um, us shooting on film. Never touched the format. He had learned filmmaking while he was incarcerated, and even now subscribes to American Cinematographer magazine inside the walls of San Quentin. I was just like, well, why don't we bring film to you and allow you guys to learn on the format? And so we're setting up a workshop with Kodak, and we're going to bring in Super 16 cameras and cinematographers and actors and do a storytelling class in there so that these men can shoot on film. And then we're going to leave behind Super 8 cameras and things so they can keep telling stories with it. So these are ways that I hope to stay engaged. I think I'm in it for life.
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, we saw a lot of films together, like Civil
Yeah.
War, It's What's Inside, etc. And I'm curious in this award season, what other films are on your mind? What's really sticking with you as particularly awards worthy?
Oh gosh, I mean, the question of awards worthy is such a tricky it's a tricky question, and I know like I'm participating in this conversation, and I'm on the journey, so to speak. Um, but I also think about in the context of doing this, like what's gonna last? What do we remember 10, 20 years from now? I'm always shocked of the movies that have the staying power. A lot of them don't get this kind of recognition, don't win the prizes and don't win the awards, but and so I think it helps give you some perspective, and I do also equally embrace that, you know, awards and the awards conversation is a mechanism by which movies like ours can find an audience, and without it, um, largely kind of stay out of people's priorities of like something to see or watch. Like the awards can really bring needed attention to movies like ours, and so um, and then just out awards or not awards or whatever. Like I just love movies and I watch them as often as I can, um, and there's so many things I've seen by peers that have really been special this year. I've seen a lot that everyone's talking about. The Honora is fantastic, and we've gotten to know Sean a bit over the years, and I just love to see good people succeeding. And Challengers was great and sexy and just a delicious, delightful movie. Um, Conclave was like really entertaining. It was like I saw it in just a theater in my hometown in Austin, and the audience were like gasping and cheering like along the way, like they were at a football game or something.
I like that. Well, it's been such a pleasure, Craig. I'm really excited that I got to revisit this movie and can't wait to see once all this awards hubbub is over what you're going to do next.
Thanks, Ed.